A Freudian slip. Who among us hasn't heard this phrase? Very systematically, the opinion is being imposed in the information space that there is no more significant figure in psychology than Sigmund. Freud is our everything. Just listen to these praises. Freud's impact on science rivals that of Copernicus or Darwin. Despite flaws in his theory, Freud essentially understood it, that the human psyche has a kind of operating system which we don't fully understand yet, but which we can study, and therefore we can make changes to it. It's like if members of wild tribes were given tablets, and they just poked at them, and then someone appeared who figured out how to go into the settings menu. But are these glowing reviews actually accurate? What is Sigismund Shlomo Freud truly remembered for by scientists? And did he ever deliberately lie? Let's find out. Once, in 1973, a group of researchers set out to write a book in support of Freud, which eventually resulted in the iconic volume Experimental Freudian Theory, Psychology Reveals, in which the authors honestly admitted that there is no evidence. Let's start with the fact that the rumor that Freud invented the unconscious was actually started by Freud himself. And there's no questioning his public relations skills, because he definitely wasn't a foolish man. As a child, Sigismund had exceptional academic abilities and a passion for learning. Everything new. At 9, he passed exams and entered the gymnasium a year early. Already in his youth, Freud spoke French, English, Spanish, and Italian fluently, and also studied Greek and Latin. After graduating with honors from the University of Vienna's medical faculty, young Freud began in surgery, but left after a few months, finding the work too exhausting. After working for some time with the famous psychiatrist Jean Charcot, and then with his friend Joseph Breuer, who both used hypnosis in their medical practice to eliminate hysterical symptoms, Freud decided to stop using hypnosis in his sessions, and he developed the method of free association, during which the patient was encouraged to speak freely about everything that came to mind. The use of the free association method gave rise to the development of psychoanalysis, but there was nothing uniquely Freudian in the main idea of the unconscious. The notion that consciousness is not the captain of the mind was discussed long before him, even in ancient Rome. The philosopher Plotinus and the physician Galen noted that breathing or ordinary actions like walking are performed unconsciously. Hippocrates, observing epilepsy, where the body completely goes out of a person's control, realized that we have a non-conscious control system. In the 11th century, the Arab scholar Alhazen was ahead of his time by a good 9 centuries and invented the very word that Freud would later adopt. He suggested that there are visual illusions that we perceive unconsciously. Today, such illusions are used not only to entertain children, but also for laboratory tests. By showing words, images, and numbers hidden by speed and technique, scientists determine where the boundary lies between conscious and unconscious perception. For example, how our brain, without visually registering information, manages to process it and take it into account later. For example, without conscious involvement, we can emotionally react to hidden words or add and subtract numbers. Yes, that very same overused 25th frame. Alhazen predicted the most effective laboratory test results. We can make decisions unconsciously regarding hidden motives and desires. Freud's main ideas were developed long ago. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz address this in different ways. Our actions are governed by millions of hidden mechanisms that can't be detected. Ordinary reflection, like perception, is shaped by our expectations and ideas. The brain masks the blind spot and capillaries on the retina, filling in the image so we don't notice them, similar to Photoshop. By the 19th century, it was impossible to find a psychologist or psychiatrist who did not recognize the unconscious activity of the brain not only as something that actually exists, but also as something of primary importance. French psychologists, for example, were practically shouting that we do a lot of things automatically. Théodule Ribot noted how we use our working memory. Gabriel Tart talked about how we imitate unconsciously. Pierre Janet discussed how we are guided by goals and motives that arose in our distant childhood and now define our personality. Janet contributed the most to this idea. Later, he accused Freud of copying ideas. Stanislas Dean, a luminary in cognitive science and one of the leading contemporary researchers of consciousness, writes about Freud. So, it would not be an exaggeration to say that of all the ideas presented in his work, the most convincing ones do not belong to him, while his own ideas are among the least convincing. Now, as for the fake therapist Freud, in the 1910s, Sigmund Freud published a book about the history of a child's neurosis. In it, he describes the curious case of the Wolfman, a Russian aristocrat who suffered from depression. After a series of sessions on the couch of the genius psychoanalyst, the Wolfman is miraculously cured, and half a century later, history delivers its verdict. It's just a tall tale. Many years later, journalist Karina Abholzer chatted with the legendary Wolfman, Sergei Pankeyev, and found out that he was never actually cured. I'm in the same state as when I arrived. To Freud. The key cases for Freudian theory, little Hans Herbert, Countess Anna Woe, Bertha Pappenheim, Dora Ida Bauer, and other patients, are also far-fetched or falsified. Frank Sulloway, a historian of science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, sums up the situation this way. Each of Freud's published cases plays a role in the psychoanalytic legend, but the more details you learn about each case, the clearer the picture becomes of Freud twisting the facts to fit his theory. It turns out that psychoanalysis was essentially built on a dozen clinical cases, crowned with brilliant therapy and healing. But the problem is that the healing never actually happened. Editor. Why don't we take a look at Freud's method? Early memories are buried deep inside us, and the psyche constantly distorts them. It's always traumatic. Random childhood episodes can haunt us for life, becoming monsters and phantasms unlike the originals. That's why the task of a psychoanalyst is to defeat the monsters, that is, to figure out how memories were distorted, and to uncover the phantasms, meaning to return to the authentic version of the event. Freud was partially right about serious traumas, like childhood sexual abuse or witnessing catastrophic deaths. During a cruel and emotionally intense event, its imprint is not recorded in the hippocampus, which governs memory, but is processed directly in the amygdala, an ancient structure responsible for recognizing faces, the emergence of primal fear, and other basic things. As a result, the mind's defense mechanisms package such memories like a foreign object and exclude them from associative networks. Such memories are stored in their original form, and on the therapist's couch, they really can be retrieved in that form. The question is whether that's necessary. It's similar to how, despite Hollywood myths, bullets aren't always removed from the body after entering it, because sometimes a surgeon's attempt to remove the bullet can cause more harm than what has already been done. And then the bullet remains in the body, which encapsulates it. That is, covers the foreign object with a protective shell, so that it has no effect on the body. It's the same with memories. Cambridge scientists found that suppression extends well beyond the conscious level, and even in the very depths of the unconscious, where we send our traumas, there are still more levels from which they can influence our behavior. Freud believed memories can't do this anymore. Instead, defense mechanisms truly protect us. It's no wonder that Freud was so often criticized for his cruel, sadistic approach, because he worked with memory like a butcher. He didn't take into account that it's intricately structured, and that the processes of storing and accessing memories vary greatly from case to case. According to recent research, memory is not a linear composition, but rather a continuum where the past is intertwined with the present in a dance of mutual influence. When we retrieve something from memory, we always reconstruct the experience, adding feelings, biases, and knowledge acquired much later. Memories are essentially structured like a construction with empty pockets that are filled with whatever concerns our mind in the present. When we remember, we actually overwrite neural data. Subtitles by Dima Torzak. At the moment of visualizing events from the past, it's not a particular memory storage that's activated, but the areas that were active at that time. That's why it's easy for us to imagine, invent, or recall things that never happened. Just like in the classic experiments by psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, where after a bit of manipulation by the researchers, participants remembered seeing a rabbit in their childhood. Bugs Bunny at Disneyland, even though that never happened to them, since Bugs Bunny is owned by Warner Brothers. In Walter Disney's universe, he doesn't exist. After all this information, a reasonable question arises. Why is it still possible to make an appointment with a psychoanalyst in our enlightened and civilized world? Todd Dufresne's book, Killing Freud, 20th Century Culture and the Death of Psychoanalysis, describes one reason. Countless works have been published, reputations built, and money spent daily for the privilege of lying on a top Freud specialist's couch. In general, it's not so easy to give it up. But there's another reason why Freud is so enduring. It's simply that Freud created not so much a psychiatric theory as an alternative mythology, modeled after a religious cult. And, as we know, that's a powerful thing that works above logic, rationality, and common sense. All three signs of religion are present here. First, a dogmatic theory delivered by the Messiah Freud from the dark depths of human nature. Second, ritual practices, meetings with the appropriate attributes, like lying on the couch. Third, the isolated life of a religious group. The tendency of all psychoanalysis followers to interpret any manifestation of existence and behavior through their own belief in anal genital and other forms of conditioning. For example, Sigmund Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams, which he viewed as his most important work, was ignored by scientists and failed commercially after its first edition. Theories about dreams in general were harshly criticized by the new generation of psychoanalysts, but despite the negative reaction from scientists, the interpretation of dreams helped Sigmund Freud achieve the main thing: to form a group of like-minded people around him who became interested in his theories. Perhaps the main point is that Sigmund Freud was a genius. Much like Ostap Bender, Lieutenant Schmidt's children, now psychoanalysts, still thrive as well-paid guides to the land of fools for those seeking psychiatric novelty. It will be interesting to see in the comments what you think about this. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. See you in future episodes on our channel.